The day Unwuli was thrown out of school, it wasn't because she failed a test. It was because her mother had died, and the world decided she didn't matter anymore. In the sleepy village of Obeldu, nestled under the relentless Nigerian sun, 9-year-old Unwuli Obianuju Nadi sat on a cracked concrete step outside St. Mary's Primary School, her uniform dusty and torn, her eyes swollen not from tears, but from confusion. Her school bag, now lying in the red sand, had been tossed there by Headmistress Agbada, the woman who once called her bright like sunrise. Inside the building, laughter rang through open windows. Children were reciting alphabets, clapping in rhythm, dreaming aloud of the future. And Woolie's name no longer echoed in those walls. Just 1 hour ago, she had stood in front of the whole assembly, trembling, as Agbada announced, "Since Unwuli has no guardian to pay her fees, she is no longer welcome here." The crowd fell silent. Even the birds paused. Unwuli didn't cry. She just looked at her feet and nodded. She picked up her books, but when she turned, every eye avoided hers. Even her best friend, Isioma, wouldn't meet her gaze. That rejection, small as it seemed, tore something permanent inside her. She didn't go home. She had no home to go to. Her uncle, Chukwuma, a rigid man with rotting morals masked by suits from Lagos, had told her the night before, "You're not my responsibility. Go back to wherever you came from." Wherever she came from had burned down with her mother's last breath. That night, she slept beneath the rusted frame of an abandoned Peugeot 504, wrapped in a wrapper she found in a church's trash heap. The stars blinked down, silent witnesses. No one came for her. Years passed like dry harmattan winds, scraping, relentless. Unwuli drifted from place to place, first as a hawker in Onitsha Market, then a maid in Ugu, finally surviving the chaos of Lagos, learning quickly how the city swallowed the weak. But one night, exactly 27 years later, while attending a networking dinner for education reformers, her name echoed in a conversation behind her. "Do you remember Headmistress Agbata? She runs a failing school in Anambra. The whole building's falling apart." Unwuli turned around slowly. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from awakening. She excused herself from the table, stepped outside, and looked up at the Lagos skyline. It was time. She could feel it like a current in her spine. She wasn't going to tear the school down. No, she was going to buy the land, build a new school, and put her name on the gate. Not for vanity, but for every forgotten child who ever sat outside a classroom with a crushed spirit and a backpack full of dreams. But this wasn't going to be easy. Not in Nigeria. Not when every face from her past still carried secrets. Some of them deadly. And some she thought were long buried, would soon return. Unwuli stood at the gate of St. Mary's Primary School, 27 years after being cast out of it. The building had changed only in one direction. It had decayed. The paint had peeled into flakes, like skin shedding itself from shame. The roof sagged as though the weight of history had crushed its spine. Children now sat 3 to a bench, scribbling in torn notebooks, their voices thinner than they should have been. She had not told anyone she was coming. No press, no announcement, just herself, a charcoal blazer clinging to her frame, and a worn leather folder tucked under her arm like a relic. Her heart beat not from nostalgia, but something more dangerous, vengeance wrapped in purpose. Inside the old office, Agbada still sat behind the same desk. Her once black hair was now bone white, and yet her eyes, those precise judging eyes, had not dimmed. They narrowed at Unwuli, squinting through time. You are Nadi's girl?" she said. Unwuli nodded. "I've come to make you an offer. I want to buy the land the school sits on and build something better." Agbada chuckled, phlegm clinging to her laugh. "Build? Here? You think education grows from concrete?" "No," Unwuli said softly, "but I know ignorance grows well in ruins." The old woman's lips thinned. "You think I don't know who you are now? That your name is on TV and newspapers? That Lagos bows when you walk? You came here to humiliate me." "No," Unwuli said again. "I came to finish something that started when I was 9. Agbada stood slowly, trembling not from age, but from fury. "You're still that abandoned child, seeking applause for surviving." Unwuli walked out without another word. She had not expected a handshake. She had come to draw the first line on the battlefield. That night in her hotel room, Unwuli stared at the ceiling fan spinning shadows on the wall. She had just crossed the first threshold. She knew it because her phone rang at 2:13 a.m., and the voice on the other end of the call was not listed in her contacts. "You should not come back here," the voice said. "You left a grave open. Now others will fall in." The call ended. She sat up, her hands clenched involuntarily. That voice, she knew it. Isioma. The same Isioma who couldn't meet her eyes the day she was expelled. The same girl who was now a local counselor with ties to the shadowy men who controlled land titles in Anambra. The same girl who, records showed, had recently purchased the land next to the school. This was no coincidence. This was a game. The next morning, Anwuli visited the land registry office. As she waited in a dusty corridor, a young man approached her with a manila envelope. "From a friend," he whispered before vanishing. Inside were photos of her, taken the night before, in her hotel room, from the rooftop opposite. There was also a note: "You came to rebuild a school. Be careful you don't bury a legacy instead." And Wooly walked outside slowly. The sun didn't feel warm anymore. It felt like an interrogation light. Her memories were no longer memories. They were trails, ones someone else had also been following. She was no longer just returning to a village. She had entered a war, and the school, that broken little ruin, was now a battleground for truths much older than her exile. The rain came without warning. In Obeledu, the rainy season didn't just wash roads, it uncovered things, bones in the soil, secrets long buried beneath layers of silence and habit. Anwuli was at the old Nadi family compound, abandoned since her mother's death. Her footsteps echoed on cracked tiles, each step scattering cockroaches and dust like memories trying to flee. She had come here because she had nowhere else to go. Lagos connections meant nothing in this village. Power here wasn't carried in titles, but in what you knew that others were afraid you'd say out loud. She found the room where her mother once kept her tailoring machine. The cloth scraps were still there, eaten through, faded. But inside the wooden wall panel, where she once watched her mother hide coins, Anwuli found a small envelope. Inside was a name, written with a deliberate, careful hand. Egbunakalu. Trust him. He knows. No address, just the name. 3 days later, she found him in Suka, outside a rust-colored university lecture hall, giving a passionate lecture on colonial residue in post-Civil War educational structures. He was older than she expected. Dark skin creased by the sun and time, wearing sandals and a disobedient beard. When she told him her mother's name, he went quiet. He didn't offer a seat. He simply looked her in the eyes and said, "They never told you, did they? Your mother didn't die from fever. She was silenced." The room around Anwuli blurred. Her ears rang. She struggled to breathe. Why? Why would anyone want to kill her? Egbuna's voice was calm. Too calm. Because she found the land documents. The original ones. The ones that proved St. Mary's wasn't built on communal land. It was stolen. She knew who forged the signatures. She tried to speak. Days later, she was found on the floor, foaming at the mouth. Anwuli shook her head. No, she was sick. My uncle said. Chukwuma Nadi was part of it, Egbuna interrupted. Your mother wasn't just expelled from life, Anwuli. You were meant to disappear too. He took her to an old archive inside the university's forgotten basement. There, amidst film reels and damp files, he retrieved a sealed envelope marked 1968. Inside was a blueprint, not of the school, but of a military communications center hidden beneath the school, used during the Nigerian Civil War. That land was not chosen randomly, he whispered. There are still materials buried there, valuable, radio parts, maybe more. Some say foreign documents. Those who control that land control a history Nigeria never wants to admit. And Woolly's mouth went dry. And Isioma? She bought the land next to it. Egbuna smiled grimly. Not just next to it, under it. She plans to demolish St. Mary's and build a shopping plaza. A silent erasure. Anwuli's hands curled into fists. Her fight was no longer about shame or redemption. It was about truth. And truth was dangerous. That night, Anwuli returned to Obeledu. Waiting for her, inside the dark, power-starved room of her hotel, was a man with a scar down his jaw and tribal marks faded with time. He did not flinch when she opened the door. He simply lit a match, held it to a candle, and said, "Your mother saved me once. My name is Kenna. I protect what she died for." From the folds of his wrapper, he produced an old, battered cassette tape. On this tape, your mother names them all. But we must get it digitized before they come for us. A scream rang out in the hallway. Glass shattered. The lights flickered once and died. Ekena moved quickly, grabbing Anwuli by the wrist. We run now. They fled into the streets, into the night thick with smoke. As behind them, the hotel burst into flames. Someone had tried to erase her. Again. But this time, Anwuli had a name, a mentor, an ally, and a voice from the grave. Dawn broke like a bruise across the Obeledu sky. Ash clung to the air from the smoldering remains of the hotel. Nothing had been left untouched. Anwuli's documents, her laptop, her photographs, erased. All except the cassette tape, now hidden inside the lining of Ekena's sandals, sealed with duct tape and mud. They escaped into the forests beyond Amaife village, where Egbuna had arranged a safe house owned by a retired priest, Father Maduabuchi, a man who had once baptized half the village and buried the other half. He greeted Anwuli with no warmth, only recognition. "You are Nkechi's daughter," he said, "so the wheel has turned again." Inside his compound, protected by mango trees and silence, Anwuli sat with Ekena and Egbuna. She listened to the crackling playback of the tape on a rusted player, their faces lit only by kerosene lamp. Her mother's voice emerged, thin, urgent, terrified. "If anyone finds this, it means I've failed. The land the school sits on, Agbata, Chukwuma, and 3 others signed falsified deeds. I have copies. I have proof. They think because I sew clothes I can't read. They are wrong." There was a cough, a rustle. Then the recording cut. Silence fell. "We digitize this," said Egbuna, "and we release it." But Ekena raised his hand. "We don't know who we can trust. Once this goes online, the people it exposes won't disappear quietly. They will come after you, Anwuli, not just politically, but physically. Your name is power now, but power makes enemies." That night, Anwuli walked to the back of the priest's garden, where tall cassava plants swayed in windless air. She stood still, thinking. She wasn't afraid of being hunted. She was afraid of one thing only, that after everything, no one would care. 3 days later, she traveled to Aka under a false name, using Ekena's network. There, she met Ngozi Eke, a cyber investigator and whistleblower, living off-grid. The woman, barely 30, with hair shaved to the scalp and tattoos shaped like Biafran stars, greeted her with one sentence: "They've been watching you for months, since the day you submitted your Education Foundation proposal to the ministry." Anwuli blinked. "But that was confidential." Ngozi laughed dryly. "In Nigeria, confidentiality is a myth." She plugged the tape into an interface, listening closely. "This," she whispered, "is dynamite." But just as the file transfer neared completion, the screen blinked red. "Intrusion detected. Remote breach attempt. IP traced to Obeledu LGA Council server." Isioma, her oldest friend, was now her sharpest knife. That night, Egbuna and Ekena brought in 2 more allies. Captain Aleki, retired military intelligence, who served with Anwuli's father in the 90s. Chiamaka, a former journalist turned herbalist, whose brother vanished while investigating Chukwuma's NGO. They called themselves the Inner Circle. They had waited 27 years for someone to reignite the fire. Now, they prepared Anwuli for the trials ahead. "The tape is just a match," Captain Alechi said. "You need wood, kindling, and a plan." Egbuna added, "We will break this empire from within, one brick at a time." But Anwuli remained silent. She had just received a package. No note, just a flash drive. Inside, a video of her mother, filmed in secret. In it, Nkechi Nadi sat at a sewing table, whispering names. Then she paused, stared at the camera, and said, "If my daughter sees this, don't become like them. Don't burn everything. Build, even if your hands shake." Anwuli turned off the video. Her hands were indeed shaking. She turned to the circle. "I won't run. I won't hide. But I won't burn the school either. I'll build, but we expose them first." Her enemies were circling. But now she had her own circle, and they were ready. The air inside the catacombs of St. Mary's was heavier than memory. Beneath the crumbling foundation of the school, deeper than the roots of its broken mango tree, lay a tunnel system carved during the Biafran War. It had been sealed for decades, forgotten by all but those who had something to hide. Egbuna had once been a boy messenger here, running coded notes between rebel radio stations. Now he was leading Anwuli through the past's intestines. Their path was lit only by oil lamps and the faint green pulse of Ngozi's military-grade tablet. Each step disturbed a silence older than grief. "This is where the bodies were buried," whispered Ekena, running a hand along the damp walls. "Not literal corpses. Secrets, agendas. This is the inmost cave. At the chamber's core, they found it, a safe embedded in concrete, hidden behind a false wall bearing Latin inscriptions from the mission school days. It took Chiamaka nearly an hour to bypass the ancient lock system. She worked in complete silence, her fingers trembling only when the last bolt clicked free. Inside were papers, brittle, yellowed, sealed in plastic, land deeds, financial ledgers, letters in French bearing foreign stamps, a worn passport, and a photo. An old black and white photo of 6 people, Headmistress Agbada, Uncle Chukwuma, a white man in military uniform, 2 unfamiliar Nigerian officials, and shockingly, Father Maduabuchi, the very priest who sheltered them. Anwuli stared. The priest is one of them. Egbuna's face hardened. He lied to us. He's not just a witness, he's a brick in the wall. They returned to the surface at dusk. The school above them was alive with children again. Isioma's office had resumed classes just to mask the upcoming demolition. Her plaza blueprints had already been circulated. She called it the Legacy Towers. That night, Anwuli confronted Father Maduabuchi in the chapel. He did not deny it. His voice remained low, tired. Your mother tried to save the soul of this land. I tried to save its order. We made different bargains. Anwuli stepped forward. You buried her truth. You gave a killer her last rites. The priest nodded once, then handed her an envelope. Inside, a single sentence written by Nkechi Nadi in faded ink. My silence must become my daughter's noise. Maduabuchi looked at her, then turned and walked out of the chapel. He did not lock the door. He never came back. That week, Ngozi released a leak drop of the digitized evidence, published through a South African media house. It went viral. Names, signatures, accounts, war documents all surfaced. The country stirred. Protests broke out in Awka. News stations debated whether St. Mary's land scandal was the biggest educational fraud since the 80s. But the same day, Chukwuma Nadi was appointed special advisor on national curriculum. Agbata went on state television and denied everything, smiling through her dentures. And Isioma released a statement accusing Anwuli of forgery, emotional manipulation, and treason. At midnight, Anwuli sat alone outside the ruins of the school, watching a stray goat chew paper from a burnt textbook. The world knew the truth now, and it still wasn't enough. But deep in her pocket was one last key, the passport from the catacombs. It belonged to a French intelligence officer, the same man seen in the photograph with Chukwuma. Stamped on its final page was a destination, Cotonou. Something bigger had begun long before her mother's death, and now Anwuli would follow it all the way to the next cave, even if it swallowed her. Cotonou greeted Anwuli with heavy skies and a wind that smelled like the past burning. The French passport from the safe led her here, to Rue des Martyrs, a dusty alley off the main port road, where rusted plaques still bore colonial insignias. Beneath an abandoned French consulate, buried in a sub-basement choked with mildew and spiderwebs, she found the name etched in the logbook. Capitaine Henri Marcel, 1969. Reassignment, Operation Bakassi. Egbuna had explained before she left, Operation Bakassi had never been publicly acknowledged. It was a French coordinated program to weaponize communication networks during the Nigerian Civil War, a way to install leverage to create dependencies. Henri Marcel wasn't just a liaison. He was the hand that placed the seeds. And St. Mary's Primary School, built right over an old rebel relay station, had become one of the final caches of that network. The passport proved Marcel had returned to Cotonou in 1996, but after that, he vanished, until now. With Ngozi's help, Anwuli traced Marcel's last living contact, a man named Basile Kone, a retired telecom operator living in a seaside shanty on Gambi Lagoon. They arrived by canoe, Ikenna paddling silently under the moon. Basile was waiting, old, bent, blind in one eye, but his memory was sharper than any blade. Henry never left, he said in fluent English. Not really. His legacy was injected into Nigeria like poison in sugar. Anwuli sat stiff, listening. The men he trained, Chukwuma was one of them. Your uncle, I remember him. Young, arrogant, hungry. He wasn't a politician. He was a courier, Henry's courier. Basile handed her a bundle of tapes, blue with mold. This is their plan, their recordings, their coded transmissions. They called it the Ostrich Network, because everything was buried underground, with heads in the sand. Anwuli's fingers trembled. Why St. Mary's? Because no one suspects children. Henri once said, "If you want to bury the future, plant your secrets in its classroom." That night, they decoded the first tape using Ngozi's portable server. A voice emerged, deep, gravelly, unmistakably her uncle's, speaking in encrypted Igbo-French hybrid code. But one line stood out, uncoded, raw. "If Nkechi opens her mouth, we bury her beside the truth." Ikena's face darkened. Chiamaka wiped her eyes. Ngozi whispered, "He confessed, on tape." Back in Nigeria, chaos bloomed. As the leak spread, schools were raided. A federal inquiry began. News anchors demanded arrests, but the power structure retaliated fast. Isioma announced her candidacy for deputy governor of Anambra State, declaring the leaks a foreign smear campaign against local empowerment. Chukwuma appeared beside her on stage, wearing a priest's cassock. They weren't just defending themselves. They were becoming untouchable. The ordeal reached its teeth. At 2:07 a.m., a drone, not military grade, but modified, flew above Anwuli's lodge in Cotonou. It fired a single shot through the window. Ekena pulled her down. The bullet missed, but the message did not. They were being hunted, even across borders. Anwuli stared at herself in the mirror, a line of blood trailing down her cheek from shattered glass. She wasn't just in a war of truth anymore. She was in a war of survival, and the beast at the center of it, her own blood, her own people, had learned to wear masks, wield scripture, and rewrite the story of Nigeria's history before her very eyes. But she wasn't going to run. The beast had opened its mouth. Now, she would climb inside it. The world no longer turned gently for Anwuli. Every breath she took was watched, every step trailed by invisible boots. In the quiet hours before dawn, she could feel their presence like heat in the walls. The beast had many eyes. Some called themselves politicians, others wore cassocks. A few were family, but all were architects of silence. And she was no longer asking for justice. She had come for the sword. The reward was not money, not revenge. It was proof that could not be denied. And it came from the least expected place. A retired archivist named Madam Binta Al-Hassan, who reached out anonymously after the Cotonou tapes leaked. They met in a private reading room of the University of Ibadan library, where the air smelled of yellowed paper and secrets unsaid. Binta's voice was a slow burn, like oil over low flame. "I filed a complaint in 1998 against your uncle, Chukwuma Nadi. He altered national land registries. His edits were so surgical, we didn't notice until it was too late." From a battered briefcase, she drew out 3 microfilms. One held a land deed, the original, unaltered title of the St. Mary's plot, registered in 1965 under the Obianu Trust, a name Anwuli had never seen before. Binta smiled. "Your mother founded that trust. She named it after you." They digitized it. Ngozi ran the data through international legal databases. Within 24 hours, Interpol verified the forgery pattern. The code matched over 90 falsified property deeds across West Africa, all tracing back to a closed shell company registered in the Cayman Islands with only 2 Nigerian signatories, Isioma Okafor, Chukwuma Nadi. The sword was in her hand now, sharp, real, and hungry. But with it came danger. The moment the evidence went public, the threats escalated. Ngozi's flat in Lagos was ransacked. Chiamaka received an anonymous package containing her brother's missing press ID, stained in blood. Captain Alechi vanished en route to a meeting in Abuja. His car was found burned along the road to Lokoja. In the midst of grief, Anwuli made her choice. She booked a live interview with International Africa Network, hosted by an unbribable Ghanaian journalist named Kwame Mensah, whose reputation had survived coups, assassinations, and scandals. On live television, Anwuli sat beneath glaring studio lights and told the world everything. She exposed the land theft, named Chukwuma, named Isioma, played the original deed, showed the passport, shared her mother's voice, declared her intent to reclaim the school and restore it under its rightful trust, for girls rejected by the world like she had once been. By the end of the broadcast, silence gripped the airwaves, then thunder. The clip went viral across Africa within hours, but just as celebrations erupted in small corners of hope, the backlash came roaring. That same night, Anwuli returned to her hotel in Accra to find the door ajar. She stepped inside slowly. A man sat in the corner, sipping from a glass of palm wine. His face was familiar, yet aged, hardened. "You don't know me," he said, "but I knew your father. We were brothers in war." His name was Colonel Ndubuisi Okafor. Isioma's estranged father. I disowned her after she chose greed over legacy, he said. But I have one thing left, something she doesn't know I kept. From his pocket, he drew a flash drive. Inside, audio files, private recordings of Chukwuma and Isioma laughing over the destruction of Anwuli's foundation funding, mocking the public's short memory, naming foreign banks. You now have the sword, he said. But remember, the sword alone doesn't win the war. It only begins it. Anwuli stood alone at the window that night, watching rain streak across the glass. She had the weapon. She had the truth. But now, she needed one more thing, the will to return to the battlefield and use it. Rain fell like vengeance over Obeledu. When Anwuli returned, it was not with triumph in her chest, but the weight of knowing what came next. The retaliation. The truth was now alive in the world, and monsters no longer wore masks. But power, when wounded, grows teeth. And hers were coming. Her foundation's assets had been frozen under a new investigation by the EFCC. The office in Lagos was shuttered. Her NGO's bank account in the UK was under review. Flights were watched. Her name whispered in corridors like a curse. She was being erased, this time not by poverty or grief, but by bureaucracy. But still, she returned. And as her feet touched the red soil of Obeledu once more, the villagers gathered, not in celebration, not in fear, but in silence. Many remembered her mother. Some remembered that expulsion. All knew the name Anwuli now stood for something. But their eyes spoke of exhaustion. They had seen too many flames, too many empty promises. In the school courtyard stood Isioma, flanked by police, journalists, and her new political allies. She wore white as if purity could be stitched. She smiled as Anwuli approached, then leaned in. You lost. You don't even see it yet. Anwuli said nothing. She simply walked past her, through the school's crumbling doors into the very classroom where her childhood ended. She stood there, silent, until the others followed. That evening, the state issued an order of demolition for the school, citing public hazard and illegal occupation. The entire community was told to evacuate the premises within 48 hours. That night, Akena returned from Abuja with bruises on his face and blood dried at the collar. He'd been ambushed, beaten, left with a message. Tell the girl we know where she sleeps, and who she loves. Ngozi called from Ghana. The journalist who aired the interview had disappeared. The footage had been pulled down from local sites. Only one mirror remained, on a forum run by activists in Tunisia. But the noise had dimmed. Truth had been spoken, yes, but the machine was still louder. Then something broke. Anwuli walked out of her hotel room at 4 a.m. and saw her uncle Chukwuma waiting outside, dressed in gray, without guards. He looked old, smaller than she remembered. They'll kill me too, he said. She stared. Why come to me? Because you're the only one who knows what we buried. He handed her a set of handwritten journals. Not copies, originals. Inside, lists of names, fund transfers, account numbers, shell companies, foreign donors, political payoffs, and a ledger connecting wartime intelligence to present-day land theft. He was unraveling. They promised me legacy, he said, voice dry. I only got shadows. Then he added, you should leave this country. She didn't answer. When she turned her back to walk away, he said too softly, your father didn't die in war. He was executed by those same men, and I said nothing. By morning, Chukwuma was dead. Official story, heart failure. Real story, a poisoned bottle of ogogoro left outside his room. No suspects, no arrests. Anwuli sat alone at the ruins of the school, where demolition cranes loomed nearby like vultures with metal beaks. Her allies were scattered. Her funds were gone. Her story was losing oxygen. And yet, she pulled out her mother's sewing scissors from her bag, the same ones used to cut uniforms in that very classroom. She pressed them to the ground, dug, and beneath the earth, she unearthed a rusted box wrapped in plastic. Inside, a blood-stained handkerchief, a letter addressed, to my daughter, when they forget me. A single key. No one knew what the key opened, but Anwuli knew what it meant. This was not the end. This was the place of collapse. And collapse is how foundations are built. The village of Obeledu awoke to a sunrise blackened by smoke, not from fire, but from resistance. At 6 a.m., a barricade rose on the road leading to St. Mary's. Women stood side by side in faded wrappers, arms locked, eyes defiant. Men dragged old tires and broken furniture into the street. Children painted signs on rusted zinc plates that read, "This land remembers. This land belongs to us. The demolition crew never arrived. They were stopped before they reached the outskirts, not by police, but by fear. A video had begun circulating, fast, raw, viral, on Wooley's face, her voice, and behind her in the frame, her mother's letter, read aloud in her own trembling voice. If this reaches my daughter, then I have lost the fight, but if she is reading it, then she has survived. Let them bury me, but not my story. The video was streamed by Tunisia's underground journal servers, mirrored across encrypted activist networks in Johannesburg, Dakar, Nairobi, Accra, and eventually, Abuja. What truth couldn't do in silence, a mother's ghost did in full view. And then came the breaking point. The key Unwuli had found, brass, corroded, belonged to a safe deposit box in Onitsha, registered under a false name, Margaret Diallo, a code her mother once used for confidential tailoring clients. Inside the box, a set of undeveloped film reels. A notarized agreement between the French government and Chukwuma promising post-war land rights in exchange for radio silence. And a letter signed by Henri Marcel revealing the exportation of Civil War intelligence data through Nigerian school systems from 1973 to 1996. It was international, it was historical, it was treason, and it was all real. Unwuli didn't go to the authorities. She went to The Hague. Within 48 hours of submission, international media erupted. Le Monde, BBC Africa, Al Jazeera, and Sahara reporters published coordinated exposes titled The Nigerian Classroom Conspiracy, a Nation Built on Buried Voices. For the first time, the story wasn't just local. It became continental. And suddenly, those who had laughed in rooms of power found their names in global headlines. Isioma vanished from public view. Her campaign dissolved. Anonymous videos surfaced of her boarding a private jet to Morocco. Agbada suffered a stroke in her home 2 days later. Her family issued a vague statement. She never spoke publicly again. But the one that broke the dam, the one that resurrected Unwuli completely, was the call from the president of Nigeria, requesting a private meeting. They met at the State House in Abuja. No press, no handshakes, just silence, tea, and a thick folder labeled "Shh, Special Counsel Recommendation, Educational Reparations and Land Reform." The president spoke without ego. You've exposed more than corruption. You've torn open a wound we never stitched. You can't fix all of Nigeria. But what would you fix first? Unwuli, calm, replied, one school, one truth, a place where girls aren't forgotten when their mothers die. By the end of the month, St. Mary's was declared a National Heritage Site, pending full reconstruction. But Unwuli refused state funds. Instead, she launched the Obianuju Foundation for Lost Girls, seeded with crowdfunding from across Africa, the diaspora, and survivors of silence. Ekena returned to her side. Ngozi published a book. Egbuna founded a school of archival justice. Chiamaka began a program for journalist protection in rural zones. And on the first day of rebuilding St. Mary's, under a sky finally free of smoke, Unwuli knelt in the soil and placed the original scissors back where she dug them up. She looked around at the young girls watching her, silent, wide-eyed, unforgotten, and whispered, "This time, the walls won't keep you out. They'll hold you in." The new St. Mary's School for Girls did not rise with haste. It rose with intention. Every beam placed was blessed by the hands of women who once sold vegetables under the sun. The tiles were pressed in patterns that echoed the weaving motifs Unwuli's mother used in her dresses. The front gate bore no politician's name, no state crest, just a single bronze plate that read, "For the rejected, for the remembered." Construction was funded not by banks or ministries, but by thousands of small donors, widows, teachers, former students, strangers who had once stood at the edges of systems built to forget them. And still, the surprises had not ended. 3 months into construction, a letter arrived from Switzerland, marked in the seal of the World Education Council. Inside, a nomination. Unwuli Obianuju Nadi for the Global Truth and Access Prize, awarded once per decade to those who redefine the purpose of education across nations. But Unwuli didn't weep. Not yet. Not even when a team of international journalists asked her to speak at the African Union Summit, or when a foreign documentary began filming her journey under the title Daughter of Dust, Voice of Stone. Because she knew what came next. Legacy wasn't just what you left behind. It was what you taught others to carry forward. The girls who enrolled in St. Mary's first year were not chosen by grades. They were chosen by story. Each one had survived something: abandonment, displacement, war, silence. And each one was taught not to simply read books or recite history, but to investigate, question, challenge, protect. Ngozi returned as their digital ethics teacher. Ekena ran their physical training, turning trauma into strength. Chiamaka taught them the art of telling truth without permission. And Anwuli? She taught them something that had no syllabus. She taught them how to rise after being erased. But the greatest surprise of all came not in a package or a file, but in a person. One afternoon, a woman with short gray hair and tired eyes arrived at the school gate. She held a small book wrapped in banana leaves. The guard called Anwuli. They met under the mango tree, where Anwuli once sat with dust on her uniform and no future in her name. The woman spoke quietly. "I am Adora Nadi, your father's sister. I fled during the war. I've lived in Ghana since 1970. I thought you should have this." The book was a journal, Anwuli's father's war diary. It told of battle, betrayal, love, and regret. In its final page, dated the night before his execution, he wrote, "I cannot protect you, Anwuli, but I believe your name will protect others. That is enough for me to sleep in the ground with peace." That night, under the glow of solar lanterns and the whisper of harmattan winds, Anwuli sat in the school's new library, her library, holding the journal, her mother's scissors, and the key that started it all. The 3 relics of her resurrection. The 3 gifts she would leave behind for others. She was no longer building a school. She was building a world. And the elixir she brought back wasn't power, wasn't revenge. It was memory, unforgotten, immortal. The kind that swirl around names too loud to silence, too clean to smear, too rooted to uproot. In the capitals of West Africa, in the corridors of ministries and radio stations, 3 words now held weight not even bullets could destroy. Anwuli Obianuju Nadi. But for Anwuli, this last ascent wasn't about glory. It was about endurance. 6 months after St. Mary's opened, 3 armed men were caught attempting to break into the school at night. They carried fire accelerants. They never spoke under interrogation. Their fingerprints matched contractors formerly employed by the Isioma Foundation, now dissolved. The world moved on, but danger never left. So Anwuli made a final decision, not to protect herself, but to protect the idea. She legally transferred the deed of St. Mary's to a perpetual trust owned by no single individual, only by its current and future students. A school, she told the world, should never belong to a politician, a pastor, or a president. It should belong to the girls who walk its halls. That declaration sparked a wave. Within a year, 13 other schools across Nigeria adopted the same model. In Uganda, in Sierra Leone, in Mali, dusty courtyards became places of reawakening. Women wrote Nadi protocols into school bylaws. Donations came not with plaques, but with promises. But the mountain still rose higher. And one day, a letter arrived on official stationery, bearing a red wax seal and the symbol of the African Union. Anwuli was invited to keynote the Pan-African Forum on Decolonized Education, held in Addis Ababa. It was a summit attended by heads of state, monarchs, scholars, and survivors. She wore no makeup. She brought no speech. She stood before them and simply told the story of a 9-year-old girl thrown out of school, a mother buried without justice, a land fought over like treasure, and a future no longer for sale. When she finished, the room rose. Not in applause, but in recognition. She had not come to ask. She had come to mark a place in history. But the final surprise came not from a country or an institution. It came from the earth itself. One morning, as the girls of St. Mary's began their sunrise assembly, a student screamed from behind the building. They ran to find what she'd discovered. Beneath the spot where the mango tree once stood before it fell in the last storm, the roots had unearthed a buried metal box. Inside, a cassette tape, a set of photographs from the war, a journal in a language none of them could read, except Anwuli. She recognized the script. It was Biafran shorthand, taught secretly to her mother. The tape played a lullaby, sung in her mother's voice, half broken, half whole, and the last line whispered, "If you're hearing this, my child, then the land has healed." Anwuli wept, not from grief, but because she knew the mountain had come full circle. She was no longer climbing. She was the mountain now. And beneath her, generations would build, dream, resist, rise. Not because she had conquered power. Before we go, if this journey moved you, if Nwuli's courage echoed something inside you, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. What would you have done if you were Nwuli? Would you have forgiven her uncle? Stayed silent to protect yourself? Or gone even further? Have you ever experienced a moment where truth was too dangerous to speak? What gave you the courage, or what held you back? What does legacy mean to you? Is it something you inherit, or something you fight to define? Which moment in Nwuli's journey hit you the hardest? Was it the betrayal? The letter? Her return? Drop your answers in the comments. We read every single one. Share this story with someone who believes in justice, in education, in the power of truth. Together, let's turn stories into movements.